The world stood still as Catherine and Prince William made their historic royal debut as king and queen. There are moments in history that stop everything, not just for one person or one family, but for an entire world. The kind of moment where someone sitting alone in their living room, halfway across the globe, puts down their cup of tea and just stares at the screen. This is one of those moments. And at the heart of it stood two people who had spent the better part of their lives quietly preparing for it, even when no one was watching. William was born into a life he never asked for. A prince before he could speak, photographed before he could walk. The whole world had an opinion about him before he had an opinion about anything. His mother, Princess Diana, was the most famous woman on the planet, and her love for him was as fierce and open as the grief that followed when the world lost her. William was just 15 when she died. The kind of loss that does not announce itself loudly after the first few weeks. It just settles in quietly and stays. He grew up in the full glare of cameras and public expectation, and yet somehow, he managed to grow up. He went to university. He fell in love. He served in the military and flew search and rescue helicopters in Wales, pulling people out of the sea and the mountains, while the rest of the country had no idea the future king was hovering above them in the dark. There was always something grounded about him, something that felt earned rather than inherited. Catherine came from a different kind of world. Her family was not royal. Her parents had built their own success quietly and steadily, and she had grown up in a home full of warmth and normality. She was an ordinary girl who happened to walk into the same university as a prince, and neither of them had any idea what that would mean. They became friends first, then more than friends. Then, after years of a relationship that the whole world seemed to have an opinion about, they became something permanent. Their wedding in April 2011 was watched by more than 300 million people around the world. 300 million. There is no number quite large enough to explain what that means. People who had never been to Britain, who had never met a single member of the royal family, who had nothing personally invested in any of it. They woke up early, stayed up late, and watched. Because there is something about two people choosing each other, standing in a centuries-old abbey in front of God and the world, that cuts straight past all the politics and the pomp, and reaches something very human. But here is what most people did not see. Behind the carriage rides and the balcony waves, and the dress that the world could not stop talking about, two young people were quietly stepping into something enormous. The royal family is not just a family, it is an institution, a living piece of history, and with that comes pressure that most people will never have to understand. The pressure to be perfect in public, while being allowed to be imperfect in private. The pressure of knowing that every word, every expression, every stumble will be photographed, analyzed, and argued about. In the years that followed their wedding, William and Catherine built a life. They had 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and raised them with a deliberate kind of normality. School runs, holidays that looked like the holidays any family might take. Charlotte playing football in the garden, Louis photobombing things at public events, with the cheerful obliviousness of a child who has not yet learned to be self-conscious. They were parents first, royals second, and that choice was not an accident. It was a decision, made quietly and held firmly. Catherine threw herself into causes she genuinely cared about. Not the kind of care that looks good in a press release. Real care. The kind that sends you back again and again, even when the cameras are not there. She worked on early childhood development, on mental health awareness, on supporting families going through things that no family should have to go through alone. She had a way of sitting with people that made them feel, at least for a moment, that they were not alone in whatever they were carrying. And then, in early 2024, everything stopped. A health announcement came from Kensington Palace. Catherine had been diagnosed with cancer. The details were kept private. She was entitled to that, as any person is. But the news hit in a way that surprised even people who had never considered themselves particular followers of the royal family. There was something about her that had always felt reassuring, steady, present. And now she was quietly stepping away from public life to face something that no title or privilege could make easier. The months that followed were uncomfortable for the public, in a way that was worth examining. There was an outpouring of genuine warmth, but there was also, particularly online, an ugly rush to speculate, to demand answers, to treat her private medical situation as though it belonged to everyone. It did not. She was a wife, a mother, a daughter. She was sick. And she was doing what anyone would do, focusing on her family and her health, and trying to get better. She did get better. By the end of 2024 and into 2025, she was returning to public engagement slowly, carefully, on her own terms. When she appeared again, the reception was extraordinary. Not just polite applause, something deeper, something closer to relief. The kind of feeling that happens when someone you had quietly been worried about walks back into the room and smiles. William, through all of it, had held things together. He had kept the children's routines as steady as possible. He had taken on more public duties while managing everything at home. He had done it all without making a performance of it, which is perhaps the hardest thing of all. When the public could see him, he looked like someone carrying weight, but he carried it the way his wife had always carried things, without drawing attention to the weight itself. Meanwhile, King Charles III, William's father, who had himself received a cancer diagnosis around the same time as Catherine, was navigating his own health challenges while continuing to serve as monarch. The parallel journeys of father and daughter-in-law through illness, both handled with a kind of dignified quietness, said something about the family that statistics and official biographies never quite capture. They were people, real, fragile, impermanent people, doing their best inside a structure that demands they appear otherwise. By 2026, something had shifted in how the public saw William and Catherine. It was not sudden. It never is, with these things. It was a gradual settling, like furniture in a room that has been lived in long enough to find its proper arrangement. William was no longer just the future king in an abstract sense. He was becoming, visibly and undeniably, the person who would carry the institution forward. And Catherine was no longer just his wife. She was a presence in her own right, someone who had been tested, by illness, by scrutiny, by the peculiar cruelty of public life, and had come through it with something that can only be called grace. There is a photograph, or rather, the idea of a photograph, the kind that has not yet been taken but feels inevitable, of the two of them standing somewhere official, in the full weight of ceremony, representing something larger than themselves. In that imagined image, you can see everything. The years of preparation, the grief they both carry, each in their own way, the children waiting somewhere just out of frame, the country watching, the world watching. But you can also see something simpler than all of that. Two people who met at university, and fell in love, and chose each other, and then spent the rest of their lives, side by side, trying to deserve the moment they were walking into. History does not often give you that. The right people, in the right place, at the right time, who actually want to be there. Not for the crown or the ceremony or the photographs, but for the thing underneath all of it, the service, the commitment, the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of showing up. When the world stood still to watch them, it was not just because of the pageantry. It was because, somewhere underneath all the protocol and the flowers and the flags, there was something that looked a great deal like the truth. And the truth, when you finally see it, is always worth watching.